Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Multifamily with Veena Jetti. Thank you, Veena, for coming over today.
Yes, thank you for having me here.
And today we're going to talk about the exit strategy when it comes to multifamily. So how do you know how much time you should be holding a multifamily asset?
I know you want me to be like, you should hold it for 3 years and 7 months and 2 days. But the reality is it depends, right? So depending on what your exit strategy is and what your business plan is really what should dictate how long you hold it. So for us, we always underwrite our deals for a 5 to 7 year hold, which depending who you ask, they may be like, oh, that's forever. But in the world of multifamily, it's actually a shorter term hold. Gotcha. So it depends on what your business plan is, what you're trying to execute, where your property is set to perform, and if you meet Proforma expectations. So let's walk that back and break it down and make it a little easy, right? So you could go into multifamily assets and you could hold it short term, but you have to be mindful of what the tax implications of that are. But also, if you're going into value add, you might need a year or 2 years or 3 years to execute your value add plan, because you can't go in and turn over all the units all at once if it's an occupied asset, because there are leases in place that you have to honor. So it really depends on what your entry business plan is. Now, a lot of people and a lot of families, so family offices, for example, that own multifamily assets, they will want to go in and hold it for a long term. So what does that mean? They might hold it for 20 years or 30 years, or they might hold it indefinitely and continue passing it down from generation to generation. So it really depends on what your business plan is, but also what you need the returns to be, right? So if you are just looking for something that's going to produce steady cash flow and income, you might hold it for a long period of time if it's cash flowing. Okay. If you need to generate a higher IRR or return, you might need to have some kind of exit or capital event, such as a refinance or a recapture of the equity, so that you can meet your return expectations. So it depends is really the answer of how you want to go into the deal. But what you plan at the beginning is how you're going to figure out when you need to exit.
And you mentioned that it pretty much depends on all of these many factors, as well as your goal on how much income you want to be producing from that asset. But when you know that it's the right time to sell it,
yes.
How do you know if it's truly the right time? Because yes. I mean, with these changes in the market and everything, it's kind of tricky. You know,
it's a little bit of an art and a science, and it's not exact in the sense that, for example, we sold an asset. We sold it for about $30 million more than we bought it for. Oh. And we had planned to hold it for 5 years, but we sold it in 18 months. And why did we do that? Because our projections and our initial plan showed that it would take us the full 5 years to make that same amount of money.
Oh, wow.
But when we could do it in 18 months, we had to take the opportunity to do that. So had we waited 6 months, we probably would have lost several $1 million lost from where we actually ended up selling it, but we still would have overall gained, but just not as much as we did in this asset. So you can't time the market is really what it all comes back to, right? Any astute investor is going to tell you this. Time in the market matters more than timing the market. And so if you do this over a long period of time with more and more assets, generally speaking, you're going to generate a decent return. Sometimes you're going to generate a 50% return, and sometimes it's going to be 40 or 30 or 10, but it's over a long period of time when you look at it aggregate, then it's going to generally be a solid return. So to answer your question, we didn't know it was the exact peak of the market. We know that in hindsight, because it's easy to invest in hindsight, but had we waited even a couple of months, we probably would have sold it for maybe only $25 million or $20 million. So it just depends on where we are in the market cycle. Now, had we sold it before we sold it, we actually ended up selling it, we might have made only 27 or 28 million. So we actually happened to be right at the top of a curve before we sold it. So
perfect timing.
It was a little bit of luck, but also we knew too that interest rates were going to be going up, that it was going to start getting harder and harder to buy. We know that cap rates, or what your yield on investment was going to increase. We made these assumptions thinking that the market was going to go where it went. Now it could have gone the other way, and we could have sold it for 30 million more when we could have sold it for 35 million more. So you don't really know ahead of time whether you're at the top of a market or not. But at the same time, you have to look at it more objectively. So are we going to hit the return expectations that we need to hit? If we continue to hold it and the market does worse, are we going to all of a sudden start losing money? Or are we going to miss our return expectations by so much that we would rather, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? So we're constantly making those calculations. And the way exit pricing is calculated on multifamily is it's not based on what our neighbor down the street sold their multifamily for. It doesn't work like that in multifamily. It's based on the business of the asset. So there's a very simple calculation, right? It's NOI, which is your net operating income, which is your income minus expenses is your net operating income. Your NOI divided by the market value of the asset gives you your cap rate. And so based on that, you can determine if you know what the cap rates are in the area, you know what the NOI is, or your projected NOI, you'll know what your theoretical exit price is. And to figure out cap rate, a very general rule of thumb would be whatever your entry cap rate is, you can add about 7 to 12 basis points per planned year of hold. So let's take 10 basis points as our number that we're going to use. And we go in at a 4% cap rate. Then we're going to add 10 basis points times 5 years, which is what we always plan to hold our assets, about 5 years. So we go in at a 4 cap. We're going to go 10 basis points times 5 years plus the 4%. So we're going to get to 4.5% is what we're going to assume our exit is. So what we're going to do then is we're going to take the NOI that we assume in year 5, which we can see based on our pro forma, and we're going to divide it by 4.5% to see what value we need to sell the asset at to hit our returns.
That's right. And now when it comes to the pro forma, what are some of the data that we can see on that pro forma?
Yeah, so a pro forma, all it is it's just like a plan of where you think things are going. So, and it's a common mistake I see passive investors make is they'll look at an offering from a sponsor and they'll say, oh, I'm going to make a 25% return on this asset. And I'm always like, wait a second. This is a pro forma return. Pro formas are not what's actual and what's guaranteed. It's what they think they can do with the property. And I can make any aggressive assumption I want to make the numbers show anything I want them to. But the reality is I want to make conservative assumptions so that I can actually deliver for investors. And so what you really want to look at is on a pro forma, you're going to have what's called a T12 or your trailing 12. And that's going to be the historical performance. It's going to be the last 12 months on a rolling basis of performance. So every month that goes by, the oldest month drops off. So it's just the last 12 months. So you're going to take that and then you're going to see different trends. So you're going to say, okay, rent has increased by 25% month over month, right? I'm making this up. Let's say it increased 25%. I might look at that and say, wait, that is way too aggressive. Let's stabilize it or normalize it and see what happens if it increases only 3%. Okay, taxes and insurance are X, Y, and Z. We know taxes and insurance are going to go up when we buy it. So we're going to make an assumption and we're going to input our data to make those numbers higher than what the seller has right now. And as we make those assumptions, we'll be able to use Excel to determine what the NOI is. We'll be able to determine what the theoretical exit pricing is. We can determine what our investor returns would be if you have LPs in your deal.
That's right. And I feel like that it's not like you're planning for the worst performance for your building. It's realistic. A more realistic one. That's
so
right.
We have multiple versions of underwriting. We like to look at the worst case scenario. We like to look at our base case scenario. And then we like to see like, okay, if we're optimistic, what happens there? But we never show that to anybody externally because I don't want anyone to invest based on optimistic numbers. But that's where we try to track to internally is we try to do the best we can on the asset.
That's right. And at that point, I feel like the optimistical area of your pro forma would be kind of like, this is how much we need to work on in order to make it to our goal. Let's say. Yeah. So it's kind of like your North Star guiding you on how hard you want to work.
That's a great way to put it. It's the North Star.
Yeah. And now when it comes to buying and selling, which one do you think it's the one that makes you the most money when you have an asset? When you buy the asset or when you sell it?
You know, I know this is coming from like the single family worldview where it's like, oh, you make your money when you buy the asset. And it is true to some extent in multifamily, but the reality is we're not buying under value because there's a discount happening in the multifamily market necessarily. What we're buying is we're buying at a fair market value. We're increasing the value, so we're forcing appreciation on the asset. If we just bought it and left it, it wouldn't increase in value the way it does, because we go in and we revitalize the community. We operate it more efficiently. We maybe renovate some amount of units. We add income to the asset, and we make lifestyle changes for the residents, right? So when we do that, it puts us in a position to be able to force the appreciation on the asset. So we really make our money once we've actually forced the appreciation. If we don't force the appreciation on the asset, then we could have bought it well and we'll make some money, but we don't make as much money as if we sell.
You don't make the asset reach its potential at that
exactly.
point.
So can I answer both?
For sure.
Can that be my answer?
Yes.
Okay, it's like the easy way out of that one, isn't it? But yes, it's both.
Yeah, because I would say that in that case, you're actually adding value to the unit itself. And that's where all the money comes from.
Correct.
And now I know that there are some, I guess, incentives that the government does in order for us to start investing into multifamily.
Yes.
So what are some of those tax advantages that you would get from multifamily?
I would say there's two really big ones. So the first and foremost is bonus depreciation, which for the remainder of this year is still at 100%. And you can utilize what's called cost segregation. So that means you hire experts, the keyword there is experts, to come in and tell you, okay, of this 100-unit building we're buying, X amount of dollars is your furniture's fixture, equipment, your FF&E. X amount is the land, and X amount is the structure or the building. And depending on how that gets allocated, what you can do is you can bonus depreciate some of your expenditures or your systems, not expenditures, your FF&E. You can bonus depreciate that all into year one. So what happens now is instead of taking over the useful life, you can accelerate that depreciation. Now in 2023, that number decreases to 80%, then it goes to 60 the year after, 40, 20. And so it eventually phases down to 0. But it's useful right now because it's a very powerful tool to make us tax efficient. But in addition, and probably more exciting than that, is the opportunity to do what's called a 1031 exchange. So what the IRS lets us do is they can say, okay, Veena, we see you sold this property and you're about to make $30 million and we're going to come knocking. We want our capital gains tax, which, okay, makes sense.
It's a really big cut.
It is. But here's the thing. If you 1031 exchange the property, what you can do is you can defer the taxable gain on it. So I reinvest that 30 million plus whatever the underlying asset is, and I reinvest that into a like-kind asset. So maybe I go and buy a bigger multifamily and I invest that. Well, now I don't have to pay those capital gains tax yet. They just get suspended and pushed forward. They get deferred. And so now in the future, I can continue doing that. So I can let my money continue to grow and kind of kick the tax can down the road, if you will. The big caveat is, one, I am not a tax professional at all with any licenses to give you tax advice, but you should have somebody who is well-versed in tax law, like 1031 rules. Yeah, you need a lawyer and you need like an accountant or a tax strategist or CPA who can help guide you through this, because it's a very complex process. For example, if you take possession of the funds from the sale and then try to claim a 1031, the IRS will not allow you to do that. However, you have to have a QI. So if you have a QI or qualified intermediary, they take possession of the funds and then they give it to the new asset or the new seller to buy the next asset. And that is how you actually facilitate a 1031. Very generally speaking, there's obviously rules and requirements. So you want to make sure you're following those exactly so that you are within the rules of the 1031 exchange. But
that's right.
Huge tax benefit.
And if anything, you always have the help of some sort of specialist throughout all the process. And that's one of the benefits of having, of investing actually within real estate. You always have people that are willing to help you.
Absolutely. Yes. You don't have to know it.
That's true. And one of the people that can help us is actually Veena with All the Money podcast. So thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And thank you to our audience. So we're going to see you on the next episode. So stay tuned.